The sun beat down hard on the training grounds, casting long, jagged shadows over the dust-swept concrete. Recruits stood in formation, their boots aligned like rows of polished steel, faces rigid, eyes fixed straight ahead. The air was heavy with tension, the kind that clung to skin and crawled up the back of the neck. At the far end of the lineup, a whistle blew, sharp, shrill, final. She stood at the center of the disciplinary lineup. Unlike the others, she wasn't fidgeting or nervously shifting her weight. Her posture was perfect, too perfect. Back straight, chin up, shoulders locked in quiet defiance. Her uniform, though dusted and faded from wear, was meticulously kept. There was a certain precision in the way she held herself, a kind of controlled stillness that made her stand out. Not because she demanded attention, but because she refused to give it. The unit had been called to assembly without prior notice. Word had spread fast, someone had violated protocol. A direct order had been disobeyed during a live training drill. The whispers had started within minutes, small and sharp, darting like needles through the ranks. And though no name was mentioned, all eyes kept drifting toward her. She didn't defend herself. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than their accusations. The drill sergeant's boots struck the ground with rhythmic finality as he paced in front of them. His voice barked through the air, breaking it into pieces with every syllable. Discipline is not optional. Insubordination, he shouted, is a disease. And diseases need to be cut out. The line stood motionless, but a collective flinch rippled inward when he stopped in front of her. She didn't blink. There was a pause, a moment where even the birds seemed to stop moving, the wind forgetting to blow. Then came the accusation. Harsh, direct, humiliating. She'd gone against orders. She'd left formation to pull a wounded trainee from the blast radius, endangering herself and breaking the chain of command. It didn't matter that the soldier lived. It didn't matter that her actions had saved a life. It was protocol she had broken. Not bones. Not rules carved in gray areas. The kind written in red ink. Strip her rank. Strip her pride, the sergeant growled, his voice more venom than sound. Two soldiers stepped forward, hesitant at first, then firmer. She didn't move as they approached. Her eyes didn't waver, didn't flicker to them, didn't plead. It was as if she was somewhere else entirely, inside a memory she refused to share. The first soldier gripped her by the arm while the second moved to her chest, fumbling with the buttons of her uniform shirt. The air grew heavier, charged with an electricity that no one could explain. They'd all seen punishments before. Push-ups in the dirt, bunk restrictions, shouted humiliations. But this was different. Her shirt opened with a harsh rip, fabric tearing against skin. The silence that followed was unnatural. The second soldier, halfway through the motion, froze. Eyes wide, breath stuck in his throat. Even the sergeant paused, his rant suspended mid-sentence. What they saw wasn't skin and bone. It was a mark that didn't belong in training drills or recruit punishments. It was a deep, twisted scar, long and precise, like something from a combat operation no one talked about. The kind of wound that spoke of secrets, sacrifice, and surgeries not listed on paper. The kind of mark that came with classified files and ghost missions. The unit didn't speak, but the shift in the air said enough. Something had cracked. Not just protocol. Not just the unspoken rules of discipline. Something deeper. Something human. The moment her shirt was torn open, a wave of silence crushed the courtyard. It wasn't the kind of silence that begged for words. It was the kind that screamed, the kind that echoed louder than commands and cut deeper than any reprimand. No one moved. Not even the wind dared to intrude. The exposed scar on her abdomen pulsed under the sun, jagged and pale against the tan of her skin, a roadmap of pain carved by something far more brutal than military training. The soldiers who had stepped forward backed away slowly, hands trembling, as if they had touched something sacred, something cursed. Their bravado collapsed instantly, swallowed by shame and confusion. No one had expected that. They were prepared to humiliate a recruit, to make an example out of someone they saw as defiant, insubordinate. What they weren't prepared for was the truth, the ugly, brutal, impossible truth etched into her body, like a story no one wanted to read. The sergeant turned his face slightly, jaw clenched, as though the sight physically struck him. His voice, once so thunderous, now caught in his throat. His lips parted, but nothing came out. The words had abandoned him, betrayed by a reality too raw to control. She stood still, letting the silence stretch. Her chest rose and fell with quiet, steady breath, her gaze locked somewhere distant. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't broken. If anything, she was calmer now, as if the tearing of her shirt had released not just cloth, but a burden. She had been carrying that scar beneath the surface, hiding it from the whispers, the doubts, the watchful eyes that saw only what they wanted to see. Now it was out. Now they saw her. The rest of the formation didn't know how to respond. Some looked away out of guilt, others out of discomfort. A few stared, not out of disrespect, but because they couldn't comprehend it. That scar wasn't just physical. It was proof. Proof that she had seen more than they had. That she had bled in places their boots had never marched. That she carried history in her flesh that no drill or training manual could replicate. Even the colonel, who had walked onto the field moments earlier, stopped dead in his tracks when he saw it. His gaze locked on the mark. His hands folded behind his back tightened, the tension rising through his shoulders. He didn't need an explanation. He recognized the scar. Not the specifics, but the origin. It came from the kind of procedure used only in the most extreme combat situations, when survival was more gamble than guarantee. His eyes flicked up to her face, and in that split second, there was recognition. Not of her name, not of her file, but of her kind. The kind who survive things that should kill them. The kind who return from places that erase most. The sergeant, still frozen, finally turned to the colonel as if seeking instruction, but none came. Orders didn't fit this moment. Doctrine didn't explain it. There was no chapter in the manual for when your assumptions were peeled back with one jagged wound. The soldiers remained in formation, but the line no longer felt even. Something had shifted. Authority had tilted. Power no longer sat in the boots of rank or the sharpness of tone. It sat quietly, unwavering, in the woman whose chest was exposed to the world and who didn't flinch when judgment fell away. The colonel had seen the aftermath of wars most wouldn't speak about. He'd walked through bombed-out villages, zipped up body bags, and saluted flag-draped coffins with the kind of robotic solemnity that came from doing it too many times. But when his eyes landed on her scar, something inside him faltered. It was subtle, just the smallest hesitation in his step, the slightest twitch in his brow, but it was enough. Enough to signal that even someone like him, forged in the fire of countless operations, wasn't prepared for this moment. His gaze held for several seconds. Not because he didn't recognize what he was looking at, but because he did. That type of incision, the placement, the way the tissue folded over itself, it was the kind of wound that meant she had been opened up quickly, maybe even on the field. There was precision to it, yes, but also panic. Emergency procedure. No field medkit could have handled that. That was surgical. That was survival against odds nobody bets on. And the colonel, a man known for never blinking, found himself looking away. It wasn't the scar itself that unnerved him. It was what it represented. He'd read reports of covert extractions, medical emergencies deep behind enemy lines, operations that didn't make it into public record. Files sealed with black ink and digital locks. Only top brass got access to those: commanders, generals, people like him. And still, even with all the clearances in the world, those stories came in fragments. What he saw on her body was not just a mark, it was a piece of one of those fragments brought to life, standing silently in formation while others judged her like she was just another recruit. She hadn't said a word, but she didn't need to. That scar screamed a history they didn't know how to read. The kind of past that rewrites your identity. She was no longer just Private Reyes or Cadet Thompson or whatever name they had called during roll call. No, she was something else now. Something not even the colonel could label. The other soldiers noticed his reaction. One by one, they registered his pause, his averted eyes, the stiffness in his posture. When someone like him, decorated, respected, feared, visibly recoils, it sends a message. A message that speaks louder than any command ever could. The sergeant who had ordered the punishment looked back at the colonel, a question lingering on his face. It wasn't defiance, it was confusion. The chain of command suddenly felt fragile. What was supposed to be a straightforward discipline drill had spiraled into something no one could predict. And now, standing at the center of it all, she hadn't moved. Hadn't adjusted her torn shirt. Hadn't attempted to cover up the scar. She stood exactly as she had before, shoulders back, spine straight, gaze unbroken. It was almost unbearable. The colonel's eyes dropped to the ground for a moment, as if grounding himself, as if trying to sort through the sudden whirl of recognition and shame. He wasn't the kind of man to make mistakes in judgment. But in this case, perhaps they all had. The system. The protocol. The assumption that silence equaled weakness. That scars were private things meant to be hidden. Her presence rewrote those assumptions in real time, and none of them knew how to keep up. Not a single voice spoke in the aftermath. The cadence of command had been broken. Rank meant nothing when confronted by proof of real survival. Proof that couldn't be earned through drills or simulated missions. Proof that even the highest-ranking officer on the field couldn't look at for more than a few seconds. The silence didn't linger forever. In military environments, even the most shocking moments are quickly buried under orders and obligations. But something had shifted. A scar like that didn't just fade into the background. Whispers followed her after the incident, low, cautious, and always incomplete. No one dared to ask her directly, and she never offered anything voluntarily. But the rumors spread like wildfire, each version more elaborate than the last. Some claimed she'd been wounded in a car crash before enlisting. Others said she had been involved in a gang fight back home. But a few, those who'd served long enough to know how deep the rabbit hole goes, began to suspect something else entirely. One of the medics, a quiet man who rarely spoke outside of necessity, was seen flipping through old encrypted files late into the night. Not official files, classified archives, locked under multiple layers of security. He didn't say much, but the next morning, his entire demeanor toward her changed. Not with pity. With reverence. That shift didn't go unnoticed. One soldier, Ramirez, the one who had touched her shoulder when her shirt was being ripped, started pulling back. He no longer made jokes around her. In fact, he avoided eye contact altogether. It wasn't guilt. It was the dawning realization that he had crossed a line he didn't even know existed. That he had touched history without permission. The whispers began to take shape when an older warrant officer recalled a fragment of a story, something buried in the memory of a night operation overseas. A mission that had gone sideways. A team ambushed. Intel compromised. One operative presumed dead. That mission had been sealed tight, the survivors reassigned, the record scrambled. But the wound the story described sounded eerily similar to hers. A gut wound, treated in the field. Evacuation delayed by 72 hours. Survival rate estimated at less than 2%. The odds had been insurmountable. One phrase kept resurfacing, cipher extraction. No one explained it. But everyone understood what it meant. Cipher units were not regular soldiers. They didn't show up in the system. They didn't operate on schedules or wear insignia. Their missions were the ones that didn't exist. Intel runners, deep covers, moles embedded in places so dangerous even high-ranking officers refused to utter the details aloud. And if she was one of them, if her scar was a result of one of those missions, then everything they had assumed about her had been a lie built on their own ignorance. There was one night, quiet, rainy, forgettable to anyone else, when the colonel himself walked past her in the hallway. He didn't stop her. Didn't say a word. But his nod, slow and heavy with weight, said everything. That nod wasn't protocol. It wasn't rank acknowledging rank. It was recognition. A signal passed between soldiers who had seen the underbelly of war, who had carried the kind of secrets that keep you awake even decades later. By then, no one dared speak her name casually. It wasn't fear. It was the awareness that she represented something bigger than uniform or chain of command. She had done things they couldn't imagine. Things they weren't supposed to know. And that knowledge, or even the suspicion of it, altered the structure around her. They started to notice the way she moved. The efficiency of it. The silence with which she completed tasks. The split-second delay in her reactions that wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. She didn't speak unless necessary. But when she did, people listened differently. Like her words carried a different kind of weight. Not the weight of authority, but of truth. Lived truth. Proven truth. The base never officially addressed the incident. No memos were issued. No apologies were written. And, certainly, no acknowledgement came down through the ranks about what had happened during that disciplinary formation. But everyone knew. And from that day forward, everything about how they looked at her changed. She didn't ask for that shift. She didn't need it. If anything, she carried herself as if nothing had happened at all. Still the first to fall in during morning drills. Still the last to leave the training yard. Still silent, composed, unreadable. But the others, the ones who had stood beside her in line, who had once whispered about her behind her back, they began to carry a different kind of tension around her. One that came not from discomfort, but from quiet respect. She had survived something most of them would never understand, and they felt it, even if they couldn't name it. The younger recruits, especially, began to study her more carefully. Not just the way she held her weapon or executed a formation, but the way she watched everything. Every room she entered, she scanned first with her eyes, corners, exits, shadows. Always alert. Always 3 steps ahead. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. Survival honed to a sharpened edge. And that edge made its presence felt wherever she went. During one of the tactical drills, a new sergeant, unaware of her history, called her out for being too quiet during briefing. His tone was sharp, edged with condescension. She didn't flinch, didn't respond with sarcasm or attitude. She simply asked to demonstrate the strategy on the field. 10 minutes later, she had led her squad through the exercise with such precision that the observing officers didn't even bother critiquing it. They just nodded slowly, writing something down in their pads without looking up. That moment traveled fast through the ranks, and the new sergeant never questioned her again. There was a moment in the mess hall not long after, where a conversation between 2 high-ranking NCOs drifted far enough to be overheard. They weren't talking about her name or her record, they were talking about what kind of clearance someone would need to operate at that level. The conversation didn't last long. One of them simply said, whatever she went through, it wasn't just survival. It was sanctioned. That word, sanctioned, landed heavy. Because it meant she hadn't been forgotten. She hadn't been rogue. She had been chosen. Still, she never acted above anyone. She didn't pull rank she didn't officially have. She volunteered for guard duty. She sat in the back during briefings. But every now and then, something would slip. The way she corrected a tactical detail a second before the instructor said it. The way she reacted half a second before a simulated grenade went off. The way she held a rifle, not like a student of war, but like someone who had taught it. It wasn't long before some of the officers started to treat her differently, too. They stopped referring to her with the same tone they used for other trainees. They didn't joke with her. They didn't question her judgment when she made suggestions during squad planning. They simply nodded, logged the feedback, and quietly adjusted their plans. One evening, during a casual debrief, someone asked her directly, half in jest, half in curiosity, what had really happened to her. She didn't answer. She just offered a half smile that didn't reach her eyes, then stood up and walked out of the room. The conversation didn't continue. It didn't need to. That scar had said everything. Whatever she had survived, it hadn't just been physical. It had changed her, molded her. And now, that quiet presence they once tried to discipline had become something else entirely. Something they didn't know how to categorize. Over time, the tension that once surrounded her presence began to shift into something more solemn, more meaningful. The scar that had once silenced a formation was no longer seen as a mark of mystery or even intimidation. It had become a symbol. A quiet reminder that strength wasn't always loud, and real respect didn't come from shouting orders or showing medals. It came from the kind of survival that couldn't be taught, only endured. The soldiers who once kept their distance started to stand a little closer when she entered a room. Conversations paused out of instinct, not fear, but attentiveness. It wasn't about her rank, she didn't have much of one. It wasn't about her file, most of it was redacted anyway. It was about something deeper. When drills were assigned, her name was quietly added to lead small units. Not officially. Not on paper. But when instructors asked for volunteers, everyone waited for her to move first. Not because she was the loudest, or the biggest, or the fastest, but because no one moved like her. There was a gravity to her decisions, a precision to her actions that made others follow. She never gave speeches. She never corrected her peers unless asked. But when someone struggled, physically or mentally, she was often the one they ended up beside during training. Her presence calmed them, steadied them. Without trying to, she had become something their formal leaders rarely managed to be: trustworthy. The colonel, who had once looked away in the field, never addressed what he saw that day. But the change in how he treated her didn't go unnoticed. She began receiving access to training modules typically restricted to higher clearance operatives. Her files, what little were visible, started showing signs of reassignment discussions. Nothing concrete, just codes and internal notations. But it was clear to those who knew how to read between the lines, someone up top had taken notice. And not just because of her scar, but because of how she carried it. There was one afternoon, during a leadership rotation, when a simulated ambush was sprung on a squad she wasn't even assigned to. Their sergeant panicked, shouting conflicting orders as the scenario spiraled out of control. She wasn't obligated to intervene. But she did. Calmly. Without raising her voice. She stepped into the middle of the chaos and reorganized the squad in under 30 seconds. No hesitation. No wasted movement. When the simulation ended, the evaluators didn't even critique her. They just asked the original squad leader to debrief, and then told him to watch the footage again, this time focusing on her movements. Respect, in the military, often comes dressed in tradition. Through rank insignias, salutes, formal recognitions. But with her, it came another way. Through silence. Through eyes that lowered slightly when she passed, not out of submission, but deference. Through instructors who let her take point even when others had seniority. Through trainees who stopped challenging her and started learning from her. Even the hardened ones, the skeptics, the ones who'd mocked her in those early weeks, now offered nods when they crossed paths. The kind that meant, "I see you." It was as if the system, rigid and slow-moving, had reluctantly come to understand that leadership isn't always about loud commands or perfect files. Sometimes it's about presence. And hers said more than any uniform ever could. She had become the quiet constant in a place built on hierarchy and noise. An unspoken authority who never asked to be followed, yet always was.